Today's service will include a time of communion, so please pause this virtual service and take a moment to prepare your communion elements. Feel free to use your best judgment on suitable replacements.
We practice an open table, meaning you don't have to be a member of this church or any church to participate. You don't need to know what you exactly believe about communion or have your theology or spirituality figured out. Communion is about unconditional grace and love, and we believe that God offers this invitation to everyone.
So press pause now.
Welcome back. In pandemic times, gathering as a church in real life carries risk, so we won't. But that doesn't mean we can't celebrate important aspects of our faith and adapt to the times together. So we're starting a series that we think might help keep our community connected.
It's called SPAAC Church Interviews.
We'll be hearing testimony from those who bear witness to the joys and concerns of living through a pandemic, and we hope their experiences would reveal the ways in which God is still working amidst all the tragedies and injustices through us. What is your name? Where and what do you teach? And how long have you been an educator?
Well, thanks for having me on. It's good to be with you all. My name is David Leong, and I teach at Seattle Pacific University, specifically in the School of Theology. I teach both undergraduate and graduate courses in Seattle Pacific Seminary. Strangely, I've actually been doing this for a while, even though it doesn't always feel that way to me, but I have been teaching at SPU since 2008. So I guess I'm coming up on, a little over 12 years. That is the longest I have done anything in terms in the work world. And so, yeah, it's weird. I don't know that I think of myself primarily as an educator, although I've been a professor for a long time. It is something that I do enjoy, but I guess it has probably become a part of my identity after all these years. But yeah, it's been an adventure. So I guess that's just to start.
Well, David, what are some of the challenges that you or your students are experiencing in the past or are dealing with right now?
Yeah, great question. Numerous challenges. I'll try to maybe I'll start with the students, then I'll talk about it for myself. Although there's some overlap between them for sure in terms of how we're all coping with the layered realities of 2020, which has been rough. I think we are all living through this time and processing, right, all these things at the same time. Of course, the global pandemic, of course, racial unrest and turmoil in our country. On top of that, just coming off of the wildfires and the reminder of the climate crisis, all of the tensions in terms of working from home and economic changes and kids doing Zoom school. Those affect, my students in different ways, in part because I have not just your typical undergrad in terms of someone who's coming right out of high school and into a 4-year degree program. I also have students who are, older students, mid-career, second career, and then graduate students, who, of course, whose age ranges, spans a much wider range. In terms of what first comes to mind for a challenge that students are facing, I really think it's just the collective fatigue. I don't know if you've heard of the term brain fog, where this has been floating around really since the early time of the pandemic, as we were processing the overall effect of just the radical disruption to all of our lives and schedules and work and so forth. So I think generally students are coming into educational spaces feeling more stretched, feeling mentally more distracted, feeling emotionally and spiritually drained from sort of the endless marathon of Zoom and the isolation. I think certainly that compounds, when you have undergraduates coming in who are earlier in this big transition to university life, leaving their families, living away from home for the first time. It really is a big shift. And so I think it's really accentuated feelings of anxiety about their education, anxiety about the future in general, anxiety about our very broken political process. And so I'll just say that I'm really indebted to all of the counseling and mental health services on our campus. They are booked, they are overbooked, and there are really not enough, enough resources to go around. And so on the one hand, I guess this is, part of the upside of the challenge is I've really been encouraged that in terms of mental health, I really have heard a shift in terms of the traditional stigma of people feeling like, that seeking out a counselor or that looking for a therapist might be seen as a sign of weakness or a sign of that there's something wrong with you. I've really seen a shift in terms of students' willingness to share more openly, which is positive, the vulnerability that comes into even just classroom discussions about how people are doing. But that does naturally put a lot of different obstacles in the way of learning, right? And so whether I'm doing, a graduate course that's, for mid-career pastors, or just like an intro required theology class for brand new college students, I think that I just really had to recognize that the weight of that fatigue never goes away. And so I think I've had to make real adjustments in terms of my expectations. It's not just a matter of, I don't want to say I've just got lowered expectations. I think it's sort of like, I recognize that in these really challenging times, we're not going to get through as much. We're not going to be able to plow through a ton of content. A lot of it will be a lot of our time together, and especially in formats like this, will be just trying to make real connections with people, trying to hear people out, trying to make space so that people can really feel seen and heard in a challenging time. And so I think that's generally, I think, some of the mental and emotional toll on students. For me, in terms of how I'm dealing with everything, I guess, I'm feeling many of the same things that students are feeling. If anything, some of the challenges that I have, or I'm kind of pulled in terms of being a faculty member. I'm often caught between like maybe the administration and the students, or between faculty and other faculty in terms of all the numerous things that are happening. So, that's not very specific, but I'm trying to think of, challenges. Some of the challenges are just like right now our campus is open. And so there's this relatively controversial, I'll just say that we do whatever UW does. So if UW does it, just blame them. But we're open in terms of having blended courses, meaning like this week I taught 2 face-to-face sections.
Wow.
Masked, distance, indoors, but that has created a lot of logistical challenges, right? Not everyone is, naturally for good reason, not everyone's comfortable teaching those courses or attending any in-person sessions. And then logistically, there's just, it is not fun to try to lecture through a mask for multiple hours and then to, at the same time, try to Zoom people in live. So, logistically, there are some challenges, but it's really just a very busy time. So I think the challenges are both in the weeds and the delivery of stuff, but then in quieter moments when I step away and I think about, there's other challenges that I think that personally there's vocational challenges that I'm processing in terms of just my own discernment. Like if this is the future of higher ed, this is an open question. Like if the future of higher ed, even post-pandemic, is largely through an online format, which is not something that is far-fetched, right? It's not to say that all in-person classes will disappear, but that's, for universities like ours, it's a big conversation to say like, hey, for years, upper administration has wanted us to offer the majority of our courses in a full online format. So I've had to think to myself, gosh, do I want to do that? Do I want to do this, for
12 more years?
Yeah, like indefinitely. And that's a big challenge to me. Like, I didn't sign up, none of us did, right? I think,
right.
I've never felt, during this season, I've just reflected on how much learning is really an embodied experience, and how much like being physically present with people is such a critical piece of learning and education. I've always known that, of course, but I think it's just, I've never felt it so much as, of course, during this season, of how much, of how much being present with others in the flesh is a critical piece of education. So.
I really appreciate the way that you even talk about the logistical ramifications and challenges of your school being open, right? And then further, as you think about your own career moving forward, your own discernment, like early on in the pandemic, there was this whole meme that talked about like the Rona got me thinking, right? The coronavirus got me thinking about all these things. So I think that's a real moment of human connection that I think others will resonate with. What do you want people to know about teaching in a pandemic?
Oh gosh, it's not easy. I feel like I should be a pro at this point in my career. Like there are classes that I've taught like, who knows how many times, 20, 30, 40 times. I don't know. I mean, strangely, I have colleagues who've been doing this like 25, 35 years. So maybe I'm just still early, but it feels to me like I should really know what I'm doing. And what the pandemic has done is it's just like thrown all that away, right? In terms of thinking about what has traditionally worked, thinking about, taking like what we might just call course content and just putting it onto Zoom, and me talking to a camera instead of talking to people in person really doesn't translate. I think maybe there are people doing that, but I have just found that it's not that I'm totally starting over from scratch, but it really is a very dynamic, adaptive, on the fly, paradigm shifting reality, which again, I think many of us know, but I think I can't tell you how many times over the past, several months in a session like this, where of course there's just two of us here now, but where I'm looking at my screen, I'm looking at this big screen right now, and I'm looking at like a sea of 20 faces. And, and I can see from the faces, like I've been talking for a long time, and it's not unlike looking out on the classroom, but I think what's more sobering is I've had probably in every class I teach, I have a moment that's probably just like a 5-second pause in my head, but it feels like I'm outside of myself looking at this whole thing, looking at faces, looking at a person like sleeping, looking at someone gazing off, or seeing in someone else's glasses that they're totally doing something else, where I thought to myself, like, this sucks. Like, this is not, this is not good for me. This is not good for them. What are we doing here? All of those sorts of moments. So, yeah, I'm sympathetic to teachers right now. I'm in my basement. Directly above me, I have a 7th grader and a 4th grader, both in Seattle Public Schools in South Seattle. And we set up little workstations for them in our living room and dining room, little desks for them to do their Zoom school every day. I come down in the morning, I make them breakfast, I kind of get them going. And I listen to like what their teachers are doing. And I just like feel a great sense of solidarity with all online teachers right now. It's just like, man, it is a challenge. And granted, they have different challenges. For them, it's a lot of, for my 4th grader, his 4th grade teacher, I want to give her an award and a big hug to say, like, she is so patient. She's so like, just the amount of thoughtfulness and diligence and just, that patience required with little kids is incredible. Interestingly, even though I have adults who are able to pay attention and who are Zoom experts by now, I think it's still a real challenge to push through and to find that balance of saying like, hey, people are spending a lot of time and money to be in this course. And so I want to like give them the goods. I want them to make sure that like they're really being challenged. And then I think that's tempered with, or the tension on the other side is like, hey, everyone's dealing with a load of stuff right now. Maybe I should just like push that due date back, or just like not grade this so hard. And I think that's hard. That's the human side of it, where I think it would be different too if I were teaching, like, not to say it's easier to teach in STEM, but sometimes the content is a little bit more objective and less personal. Like if I'm teaching calculus, I mean, I guess there's, it's possible, but I'm just thinking it's not very common. I encounter like math students who are like learning a theory or doing calculus homework, and they're thinking, gosh, my identity as a person, as a human, is really wrapped up in this, and whether or not I get this equation right. And there's always ways in which whatever we're learning is connected to who we are. But I think because I teach theology, and because specifically I do so much work in race and culture and identity and inequity and justice, and how communities of faith can orient themselves toward the world and not turn in on themselves. These are hard conversations that really require a lot of personal reflection, that require a lot of honesty, and pretty much 4 or 5 times a week, I'm in a very awkward, tense, facilitated Zoom conversation with students where someone has said something that's offensive to others, or someone has, has gotten something wrong, or, there's no way around some of these. I mean, I just feel like I'm always stepping on landmines and then just trying to like clean up the mess. And so I don't know, that's part of the challenge. Is I would love to be able to take a step back from some of this, but at the same time, I mean, I think that's the other part about teaching right now, is because of everything that's happening in our world, while it's a burden and an obstacle in many ways, it's also a motivator, right? I feel at other times, not all the time, but I feel even more determined, right, to go hard after some of these things as we look at the crisis that our world is in, right? And so I think sometimes, I don't know if that makes sense, but I think sometimes I feel that, sometimes I feel even more energized, that in spite of these challenges we're facing, we need to press in even more to speak the truth about what's happening in our country and in our world, to call out corrupt leadership at all levels, leadership in our politics, leadership in our own institutions, in my university, in our congregations and faith communities. I think so. And anyway, I think those are some of the things that I think about. I don't know if that's all about teaching. It's more of just, I guess I'm rambling a little bit now, but you can get us back on course.
Well, you kind of touched upon this in terms of this more deeper part of who you are, but are there any joys of being a teacher right now?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, there's a lot of joys. I mean, it'd be easy to just kind of start with the lament and be like, everything's terrible. Toby died. Black Panther died. RBG is, it's like, I mean, the whole 2020 is trash. I mean, which I have felt a lot. I mean, I really have. If anything, it's really small moments of connection. Maybe just to, for example, this past Friday, I had my first face-to-face class with undergrads, which was, I wasn't nervous about it, but I was just uncertain, like, how would this go? Were people going to be really cautious? And again, we're all following the very particular guidelines the university has given, but it was really refreshing to be face-to-face with others at a safe distance behind a mask. But to know that those moments of connection, those moments of, I think the moments that I stay in the work really come from small, I don't know how to describe it. I would say it's small moments of recognition from students when they turn a corner ideologically, or when they, I'll tell a small story. This probably was the most life-giving thing that happened to me this quarter so far. And it's pretty random because it started with a pretty unhelpful email listserv that goes out to a massive amount of people, and a conversation that went sideways, and a lot of kind of eye rolling and sighing. And long story short, let's just say that I have a faculty colleague who recently published and released a book about race and a book about why courageous confrontation with the legacy of racial injustice in our country is absolutely necessary for people of faith. Mm-hmm. And this thread, this email thread, went to hundreds of people, and it was basically celebrating this colleague of mine, her accomplishments. And as these weird email threads tend to go, someone decided, I think because it's just, it's faculty, it's staff, it's a bunch of random folks affiliated with the university, and the details don't matter too much except to say that somebody decided to sort of perhaps unintentionally hijack this thread to share their theories about why Black Lives Matter is, any number of, we've heard these critiques that they're a socialist organization, because they're Marxists, they're incompatible with our universities, whatever. It really went off the rails. And I mean, maybe, like internet comments, you could just ignore it, but this was an actual email thread that a lot of people were participating in. Sorry, this is a very long roundabout way to get to the point of this story, but it's to say, after several days of some back and forth with numerous people weighing in, and I think all of us reading it, thinking to ourselves, like, this is probably not going anywhere, right? Like, this is your typical polarized conversation where the real meaningful types of exchange really should be, it should be done in person and so forth. Well, one of my former students, for whatever reason, this wasn't planned. I just caught his reply. In this long exchange, one of my former students who now works at the university just shared his experience of being on our campus and talked about, he's a Messianic Jew, and he talked about his real fears as an undergrad of coming to a Christian university. He wears a yarmulke. He's, sensitive to being perceived as an outsider. Mm-hmm. And long story short, he just said, he called me out, in a good way, and said, like, hey, one of the things that helped me was taking classes with Dr. Leong. And he was like, those classes really helped me to see that not only was my outsider status really welcome at this university, it was a really essential part of our learning together. There's more there. I think on top of that, he also gave a really lengthy and thoughtful rebuttal to someone's critique of Black Lives Matter, which I was really encouraged by. And it's not so much, I'm not looking for praise or anything. It was just a small reminder to me, because it was like a passing mention. He was like, hey, these classes I had with Dr. Leong were really formative. It was a small reminder to me, like, oh, it means something to somebody, and I don't need like praise or pats on the back. But if anything, it was in this moment when all of us are tired, and when and especially when instructors like myself are just feeling, are asking ourselves, like, does any of this really matter? Does it make a difference? It was a small reminder. It was like just an email, right, in this weird long thread that was all over the place. But for whatever reason, it really hit me. Mostly, I haven't seen the student in a few years, but it was really just a positive reminder to me of what a gift it is to journey with students in their own, I just didn't know he was processing some of the things that he was going through at the time. But I don't know if that makes sense. I should have rehearsed the punchline a little better here. Basically, that moment of realizing, like, oh, I played a small but significant part in someone's educational and spiritual journey, like, meant the world to me, because that's why we do it, right? We do it because of the students who are in the room, because of wanting to, be present to them and to see them launch into the world and be like good humans, right? To be people who are on the right side of history, who understand with clarity what's happening in our moment. And so the fact that he spoke up, the fact that, I don't know, all those things put together just lifted me in a way to say, like, oh, like it matters, and I think these, you don't know what people are processing in the classroom. And a lot of times you may not know until years later when somebody trolls your faculty email. So Anyway.
No, that's really sweet. I really feel like I just this idea of being like a footnote in someone's life, right? As an education, we have all these citations and things, but I had this imagery of just you being a footnote in this person's, journey. But sometimes the footnotes make all the difference as to whether or not papers are successful, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm happy to, like, I think that I wouldn't want to paint this as like, sometimes I did not have like a lifelong aspiration to be an educator. I didn't watch like a lot of movies where teachers are these heroic savior figures. Like sometimes I think that's what people imagine education is, like dangerous minds, or what is, I mean, there's so many of these sort of Hollywood arcs, right? Where whether it's that story of, there's the very typical one of like the white woman in the urban school. Mm-hmm. But even beyond that, like, I think of teachers being these saviors. And I often feel like teaching is really humbling. I realize I'm exposed all the time in terms of my own failings, my own poor management of time, my own like inability to field questions, my own like disorderly thinking and so forth. So it's, so it is a joy to be a footnote, and to know that like in the midst of like my failures and my feeling old, man, I can't tell you, I have felt it the last couple of years. I've never felt so old. I mean, I am not an old professor. I feel it though. Like when my students like talk to me about just their world, I think, wow, like I remember when there was no internet, I remember when there was no social media. Like my childhood was spent in a way and in a space that's inconceivable to students today. And so I don't know where I'm going with this except to say like, wow. Yeah, it's a challenge, but it's a gift. And that's where I'm really thankful that students, education, I think at the end of the day is kind of an exercise in listening and humility. And it really, I think great teachable moments come from vulnerability, come from being able to say like, I'm not really sure about this, about how to make this work. But I think when the classroom becomes a safe space in that way, I think real learning can happen. And so I'm grateful just to be able to, sometimes, be a footnote or be on the sidelines and to put students at the center of learning.
Well, your whole, I don't know, I feel so drawn to you in the way that you just shared so much of yourself, right? And thank you, like, for being who you are and being a gift to SPU and to your students and even to your family members who are right upstairs, just trying to make all this work. But how can others support you given all of this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I hadn't thought a lot about this. What does support look like? I don't know. I mean, in some ways, it's kind of abstract since, not a lot of folks are going to be like directly, in my classrooms or tied to any institution I'm serving. But in terms of supporting what teachers are doing, I think patience, flexibility. I mean, I think recognizing that, professors are fallible, right? Professors are, I think a lot about, one thing I would say I catch criticism from sometimes having to negotiate tensions that don't resolve very easily. And I would say probably I don't always land maybe in the right spot, meaning like, because of the type of content I teach and because of the conversations around race, class, gender, sexuality, and religion that like just are always at play in my classroom, I am sure that like in an attempt to negotiate that learning and take a variety of perspectives into account that are always in my classroom, I probably have like invalidated someone, I've offended someone, or I've played it safe, and maybe not wanting to upset one person and trying to And I've had students like run out of classrooms crying because they were upset by something I said or by something someone else said that I didn't call out enough. And so I think support for me is in those cases is like, recognizing that we're human, recognizing that while we are supposed to be experts in this, that this is a dynamic space that's changing all the time. And so I don't know, that's kind of abstract, but I think I would love the benefit of the doubt that, and even as I'm saying this, I think like, well, we know that old proverbial, of what good intentions are worth, right? Like sort of the path to hell is paved with it. But and so it's not that I don't want good intentions to be an excuse for very negative impact that my words or actions could have. But I would maybe at times love the benefit of the doubt, like to not get canceled, so to speak, for maybe a growth area in my life that I'm still working on, right? And I say that with, recognizing that as an expert, as a professor, I oftentimes have authority and platform and have to be held to a higher standard and account for that. And I think that's true. But just in my own moments of my own musings of thinking about that challenge, I often do, wonder if in our polarizing social media world, if I might be prematurely crucified for an opinion that I might want to share, so things like that. So I don't know if that's not direct support, but I think any way that we can move towards hearing each other with a little more patience. I don't know. That's a kind of vague in general, but that's something that I don't know. I think a lot of professors would appreciate.
I think that's what makes you a good professor, though, and an educator, where this is the hope you have for the world. And it's not necessarily being right all the time or being correct. One of my personal values that I try to encourage wherever I am is like, it's okay to be wrong, as long as we can foster an area of trust where, like you said, a culture of growth. So I think that is a really good takeaway, honestly.
Yeah, some of my favorite theologians and scholars will joke and say things like, to be a real curious, to be a lifelong learner means that you have to admit you're absolutely, wrong about some things right now. And so I've heard, some really smart people I admire say things like, probably about 20% of what I'm saying or writing is probably wrong. I just don't know which 20% it is. So I need people to help me, right? I need people to be in dialogue with me to help me, because I think when you're in that space, I think I don't know, I find that to be a helpful way to think about education, to not wanting to, everything I say and write to be like the final word. I don't think that's education at all, right? Like, so anyway, I think if others can gently point me in the direction of seeing the places where I'm wrong, like that's going to help us all to learn a little better.
Amen.
Yeah.
Well, David, thank you for your time and for all of your thoughts, and just finding different ways for the rest of us to really connect with you and what's going on in education today.